Hello, I'm Donald Leggett and welcome to Share Views, brought to you by London South East. Today, in a special edition of Share Views, we bring you David Lenigas, an Australian oil, gas, gold, medical cannabis and agriculture investor, and AIM darling or pantomime villain, depending on your point of view. No one could ever call him dull. Welcome, David.
Yeah, good afternoon, Donald.
Good afternoon to you. Thanks for coming along. Let me start at 2015 when you decided to quit the boards of all those AIM companies. I think it's 5. You just told me it might have been AIM 8 that you actually.
I can't remember.
It's
quite a few years ago, and life moves on from there. But I recall it was about 6 or 8. But
yeah.
No, it was done before Christmas, and I had my daughter coming across and my 2 boys, and I hadn't seen them for quite some time. And it was time for me to sort of hand the mantle across to a couple of senior management groups and me go on and do my own thing. And it was more about family relationships and spending some quality time for a month or 2 with some children I haven't seen for quite some time.
Was there something of the showman in you that persuaded you to do it all in one go and make a splash?
No, I had a chat with my lawyers and my advisors. I said, look, why get off 2 or 3? Have you considered about getting off all of them and just move on with a specific view on where you want to head? And I said, I completely agree. Because otherwise, if I would have resigned from 1, 2 or 3, they said, well, why didn't you resign from the rest? Or why did you resign from those 3 and not the others? So I just said, you know what? These businesses are all moving their own way. I'll just do the lot. And that way I've got 2 to 3 months to spend time with my kids and family.
There's a logic to that, isn't there? Do you have any regrets about leaving those businesses and those investors behind?
No, because I mean, to a lot of those companies, I've still sort of been an active shareholder and supporting the board. So I mean, yeah, I'm still around to help, and I'm on so many of those companies.
I suppose, given you say you're an active shareholder, what's your position with UKOG? Are you still an active shareholder with UKOG?
Yeah, of course I'm a shareholder of UKOG.
Okay. So when people are interested in what you think about UKOG and Horse Hill and all those things, then they're right to be interested in what you say.
Well, it's not about that. I mean, whether I'm a shareholder in UKOG or not has nothing to do with my view of UKOG and all the Weald Basin players. The whole concept of why I'm interested in UKOG as principally the main exploration player in the Weald Basin is the success of the Weald Basin and being part of the British economy with respect to new oil. So to that extent, my interest in UKOG and many other things around the Weald are about successful development of the Weald Basin to produce oil for the British economy. And
you still believe in it just as much as you ever did?
More so.
Are we getting closer to realisation of the dream?
Yeah, I mean the well that we drilled at Lidsey with Angus Energy this week, where we announced 443 metres of pay that we're bringing online in the next few days to the next week or so. That's the first production well that's coming on, and UKOG's having their drilling issues, but it was a fantastic hole at Broadford Bridge, and hopefully soon we'll be flow testing which Doriemus has a say in the Gatwick Gusher, and not too far, Brokenham, to put into production. So I mean, it's all starting to happen pretty quickly now.
You mentioned issues with UKOG drilling. So, just for the investor audience, because they love the detail, what exactly are those issues, and how soon will they be resolved?
I'm not involved with the day-to-day management of UKOG, but I'm aware of what's going on to a large degree because the drilling fraternity and the engineering fraternity is quite close. It was a fantastic well. I mean, when I was sort of heading up UKOG, to me that was one of the golden jewels, was to get access to the centre of the basin. It was a technical drilling success to find what UKOG found at Broadford Bridge. Now, it's very difficult when you're drilling in new environments for every well to be 100% successful in execution. They had to go and drill a sidetrack. They had completion issues. But I'm very pleased to see that last night they announced that oil had started flowing. I remember when we first had Horse Hill, it was a real bitch to get moving, but when it did, it really did.
So you say oil has started flowing last night?
Well, the UKOG announced yesterday afternoon they've got oil and gas coming to surface.
Hurrah.
Fantastic.
Are you happy, man?
Absolutely, because it's a fantastic well. Now, they've got to go and recomplete that well, because I understand there's quite a lot of drilling fluid that's been stuck to the side walls and some casing issues. But it's a matter of time and money, but that's going to be a fantastic well in my view.
Good man. At the time, you said there would be no more AIM companies for you. So
Correct.
tell me, which companies are you chairman of today, and do you regard LGC Capital as the cornerstone investment fund for you? It's the company you have on your Twitter, your famous Twitter account, after all.
Yeah. Look, I'm chairman of Doriemus, which I've now moved, principal listing, even though we're a UK company, but my principal effort is now through the Australian Stock Exchange. I'm co-chairman of LGC Capital, which we changed the ticker symbol to in Canada to LG. I'm also chairman of Afri-Ag, where we're doing some very big growth development things on the agriculture and the medical cannabis side. And I'm chairman of Artemis in Australia, which is partnered with Novo, which has probably one of the most exciting gold projects in the world today.
So it is fair to say that you've had nothing more to do with AIM. Did you find AIM too hostile? Because you're in Canada, you're in Australia.
AIM's not hostile at all. The biggest issue I found with AIM is a lot of my international fund managers now despise the whole concept of AIM. They despise the way that the market makers manipulate the daily trading. I mean, you could come out hypothetically and say, I've invented kryptonite and your share price will go down. But when I'm listening to my institutional friends all around the world that just say, look, AIM to them is now toxic because of the way it's run, because of the way the market maker system works here, because...
What's different about the market maker system here to Australia or Canada?
This is the only place the market making system exists. Canada and Australia and many other global markets are open bid and offer. You can see what you're playing against, bid or offer. Here you're playing against market makers that actually have a carve-out, theoretically, with respect to naked shorts forever without having to disclose it. And my institutional friends in New York particularly think that's absolutely crooked.
Fair
so
dues.
I've said, you know what, I completely agree with you. I'll never be coming back to AIM.
Okay.
Unless they change the rules. And I think they need to change the rules.
Good. So would you lobby for that?
I don't care, I've got too many other things to do. I'm now playing on senior stock exchanges again, which is what I've always done in my life before I started doing some AIM things. And AIM can go sail on with its merry life.
Now, for the sake of clarity, I didn't quite understand when I was reading up about you. Afri-Ag, did you resign from Afri-Ag and then come back again, or did I just...
I resigned from Afri-Ag.
Yeah.
When I resigned from all the AIM companies.
Yeah.
And when the board of Afri-Ag moved it to NEX, I said, fine, I'll come back on.
It was just AIM was toxic.
No, AIM, I didn't want to be part of AIM.
Yeah. But NEX is okay. You like NEX?
I like the NEX platform. Now, even though the world hasn't started trading it properly yet, it's a great platform for low cost, for less, in my view, manipulation than the AIM market. And NEX is starting to get some traction. I mean, look at Doriemus in the last couple of weeks. On NEX, it's actually trading more in shares and volume and dollar value or pound value than a lot of companies on AIM. And eventually they'll get it moving along.
That's good to hear.
And from my experience, maybe Afri-Ag needs to move as a dual listing to other global markets. I mean, I think my experience with Doriemus in particular in the last couple of weeks has worked. That a dual listing and keep your prime listing as London NEX has a lot of merit.
So where is Afri-Ag listed currently, and where would you think
it's listed in NEX, but I can't tell you that. It's insider information.
Oh, fair enough. Good point to
But
start.
if I did it, it would be to a globally recognised senior stock exchange.
Somewhere in Australia, somewhere in Canada.
Somewhere that is globally recognised as a principal senior stock exchange.
You've been media trained, David, haven't you?
I've been trained by life.
You worked at London for many years.
When working for London, you deal with every type of person.
That was a training in life, indeed.
Correct.
Let's talk about Cuba. In 2015, Cuba was set to be your new big thing. Then Donald Trump came along and reintroduced sanctions in June 2017. Did that kill the Cuban business for you?
I think it did, really. I mean, it's been difficult enough to get Cuba listed on a public platform, which we listed through here. It was very difficult dealing through the back office corporate compliance because of the way that OFAC sanctions affected the way that international banks dealt with Cuba and stock exchange trading, and we therefore decided to move the whole listing to Canada, which has a special relationship with respect to the United States and dealing with Cuba. And I think when the elections did change in the US and a lot of the Obama initiatives were reversed to a large degree. It made dealing in Cuba a lot more difficult, which is very sad because I think it's a country that deserves larger scale private foreign and public foreign investment. And we've got shareholders to look after, and we're heading in a new direction, which is global domination of the medical cannabis industry.
So you've basically said goodbye to Cuba, hello to medical cannabis.
We've had to say goodbye to Cuba, which is very sad. Yeah. It's just one of those corporate things. If we sat there working with Cuba, eventually the American government would have basically driven LGC capital down to the toilet on the basis that we couldn't raise funds and people couldn't trade our securities. And it was a very painful, conscious decision by the board to exit Cuba. But we'll review our options if the US government totally changes its views. But right now, the whole focus for LGC Capital is medical cannabis, which is becoming a very large global market, and other investment opportunities that we see have got good benefits for leverage for our shareholders. So
tell me about medical cannabis. Where exactly is it based? How does it work? What are the next steps? How much investment do you need for medical cannabis to make it grow?
Okay, well you've asked me a lot of questions and I've only got a limited time. The United Nations now says that the cannabis industry is now 3 times principally the size of the world coffee market. There are over 3 dozen countries in the world now that are legislating or have legislated that medical cannabis is legal or going legal. There are a number of states in the United States that have gone legal with respect to medical and recreational cannabis. We're in that game now. We just bought into one of the few licensed players in Australia. We're working with Afri-Ag, who I also chair, because they've got the growing and distribution expertise down there, through LGC Capital to create something very large in Southern Africa.
And who are the player in Australia?
Pardon?
Who's the listed player in Australia?
It's not listed, it's actually private. It's called Little Green Pharma. It's one of the few licensed medical cannabis companies in Australia, and I think there's only 8, that we bought a strategic position that we can go up quite significantly on the shareholder base. And we'd like to be in, I'd like Little Green Pharma to be in production before the end of the year and be one of the first in Australia.
So it's a buy and build strategy you have, a global buy and build strategy?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at what's happening in Canada principally, that there's about 60 odd licensed LP cannabis players in Canada. I think it's getting quite saturated. But I see the real opportunity, particularly for the large pharmaceutical companies around the world, as they see that medical cannabis is very important, is for someone to create a global footprint, and that's really what LGC Capital is all about. We're looking at vast opportunities in Europe. We're looking in other opportunities within Southern Africa, South America, Australia and Asia, and we're pretty much focused on it. To answer the question, how much does it cost to roll that business out? Probably 5s to 10s of 20s millions of dollars over the next year or 2, but there is a lot of money in Canada that you can get with respect to debt funding, particularly against growing contracts. So it's not like a lot of that business will be funded by equity. So many different ways of funding things through the Canadian market with respect to that.
Are you looking for private investors to get in there as well?
I don't tell people to buy and sell shares. It's up to them.
But you are sitting here talking to private investors.
I'm talking to everybody, not just private investors.
Okay. And
I'm talking to governments, I'm talking to partners, I'm talking to big corporations. You're talking with respect to questions and answers from private investors, and I'm more than happy to answer them.
I'm the conduit for the London South East private investor. And one of their questions is, how long before the House of Hemp gets approval to grow and distribute medicinal cannabis?
Not long, we hope. But I can't say any more than that because that would be insider knowledge.
Is South Africa a good area to work in?
Hugely fantastic. And the House of Hemp and we've got an agreement to buy up to 60% of the House of Hemp, subject to certain due diligence that we're going through at the moment. But I mean, they've got a unique facility in that Dubai trade port at Durban International Airport that once the licenses get moved into the way that we feel that we can grow the business properly, and that's what a lot of effort's going on in South Africa at the moment, that we could have South Africa as one of the key global cannabis producers for medical purposes for the world. I mean, when you look at most of the world's medical cannabis, it's grown in a lot of time where it's minus 40 degrees Celsius, and one of the best growing environments for medical cannabis is actually in southern Africa. Durban, Zimbabwe, there's some quite unique benefits there.
That is very interesting. Okay, now specifically, our investors want to know who owns Africa, Afri-Ag Pty, for example, which is different from Afri-Ag Global.
Yeah, no.
So what's the connection between those two?
Well, AfriAg PLC, AfriAg Global PLC owns 40% of AfriAg Proprietary Limited, which is the South African company, and the other 60% is principally owned by the Doriemus family. It was always set up that way.
And when it comes to the PTY part of the business, it had an 11 million turnover last year, and our investor wants to know why wasn't it profitable?
Because all the money that we're putting into the growth of the business is actually being ploughed back into the business to grow it even more. I mean, we started AfriAg PLC, now AfriAg Global PLC, and AfriAg SA Proprietary Limited. Well, AfriAg Proprietary Limited, forget about SA. I put the SA in earlier just to differentiate it for people. But it's AfriAg Proprietary Limited. With very small money from a starting base of zero, and look how quickly we've grown that business. We're now we are the largest, I think, perishable flyer for British Airways on planet Earth today. When I asked the question the other day, how many cities do we fly to every day or a couple of days around the world? And I think the answer is nearly 50 of fresh produce, fruit, veg, meat and fish from southern Africa to the world.
So British Airways loves you, eh?
British Airways likes AfriAg Global PLC and AfriAg Proprietary Limited. We're a big part of their business.
Let me take you back to the Gatwick gusher.
Yeah.
Did you ever really say that there were multiple billions of barrels of oil beneath Gatwick Airport, or is that just one of those? Is that just one of those myths that have evolved?
No, it was the energy correspondent at the BBC on that morning that came up with the number of over 100 billion barrels. I never said it during the course of the interviews for that day. In fact, on BBC World at about 12:30, I said, look, just to clarify things, there's a lot of chit-chat around 100 billion barrels, but I have never said that. Now, apparently Steve Sanderson, who was the CEO, mentioned it, but not to my knowledge. But I can only comment from what I was aware of. And as facts sort of develop, some of the biggest consultants in the world estimate now that on a P50 basis that the Weald Basin has potential for 128 billion barrels.
128 billion barrels is a lot of oil.
Yeah, which is, when you compare it to the North Sea, more than double.
And how much is it possible to actually get out using
Well, the original estimates were, I think, from memory, somewhere between 5 and 15%. I think with what we're finding now in certain sections of the limestones and some of the Kimbrich that appears to be naturally fractured by Mother Nature, it could well be higher than that in certain places and lower than that in other areas. I mean, the journey of how much recoverable oil in the Weald Basin has really only just begun.
A couple of detailed questions. What's the problem with UKOG's BB1 well? And why did you not release the oil flow production rate
for
the latest, one at a time?
Yeah, okay. I'm not involved with UKOG anymore. I'm just an interested bystander like everybody else. But to my knowledge, there was no problem with finding the oil. It's been a fantastic success. The problem was with completing the well ready for flow testing. I mean, and it's a very difficult thing when you're drilling into ground that's never been drilled before, with drilling mud types, casing types, all that sort of stuff. I mean, once they've drilled a well and made a mistake or two, they're not going to make it again. But I mean, it's been a fantastic well. So
they're going through a learning curve.
Everybody goes through a learning curve when you drill into a new part of anywhere in the world.
Okay.
Doriemus.
Doriemus.
Yeah.
Why did you not release the oil flow production rate in your latest RNS?
Well, that's a silly question, because the news release says we've drilled 443 metres of net pay, we've put in the production lining, and when the rig moves off-site, which is happening as we speak, we'll put the well into production. So until such time as it actually produces within hopefully the course of the next anything from 3 to 7 to 10 days, depending how quickly the Angus Energy guys get it all sorted, then we'll give you a production rate. But you don't have production rates when you're drilling
Fair enough.
a production well with a brine that's heavier than oil, because the last thing you want is like Texas of old with oil gashing all over the countryside, so everything needs to be kept down the hole. Until all that heavy brine comes out, which is over the course of, sometime within the next week, you won't know what the production really is. But let me tell you, as soon as we know, the market will know next.
Good man. So talking of oil gushing over the countryside, what's happening to the OGA's approval for Brokenham?
It's work in process. I mean, there was a news release saying that we're working with the OGA, or Angus Energy, the operator, is working with the OGA with respect to how do we handle the gas into the grid, whether it's into the pipeline or into to the electrical grid. And from what I understand, without breaching any confidences from the operator, things are progressing very well there. But not only will Brokenham, which is, in my view, much better than Horse Hill, multiple times much better than Horse Hill, and Horse Hill was a huge success, but Brokenham also has the potential to supply a lot of energy by way of gas or electricity as part of the oil production flow to the UK economy.
Is it possible to give me a timescale for the Brokenham OGA approval?
No, that's really up to the government.
Okay.
And I don't want to preempt the government, but I know everything's important to the government now with respect to energy security, particularly with Brexit coming on.
My final question, will Horse Hill have to use fracking to extract all the oil reserves? This is another investor question. And the second part of it, is there any merit in what Professor David Smythe or Daniel Levy have
Let's
said
answer the first one, right?
Okay.
From what we've found out with drilling with Gatwick Gusher, Brokenham, Lidsey, and what UKOG have announced with respect to Broadford Bridge, there appears to be, luckily, a huge amount of natural fracturing within the Kimmeridge reservoirs. So to that extent, the whole concept of fracking, in my view, is completely off the table in my lifetime.
What about those last little bits, though? That's what Professor David Smythe is talking about.
With the last little bits, I mean...
To extract all those reserves that you were talking about.
Yeah, but I mean, last little bits. I mean, there's big oil fields in the world that are still going at 40, 50, 60% recovery of their total in-place oil that still haven't had to resort to well stimulation practices like fracking. I mean, it's going to be outside my generation by the time the government and the people are thinking about what they want to do with the residual oil left in the Weald Basin, and whether or not the British government wants to leave it there or they want to change the rules. But in my view, that's 30, 40, 50 years away.
David Lenigas?
No, I want to answer the last one. Very important.
Okay, Professor David Smythe.
Yeah.
Any merits in his analysis of the Horse Hill geology?
Professor David Smythe is living basically in exile in France, from what I gather. And Glasgow University came out and basically disassociated themselves with him a couple of weeks ago with respect to his views of the world and his so-called relationship with Glasgow University and his expertness. I don't recall him ever contacting any of the companies to review what's going on, and maybe he should talk to the Imperial College people to find out what they think with respect to the oil in the Weald Basin, instead of sitting there throwing hand grenades from a very uneducated and very unprofessional sense. David
Lenigas, I'm going to have to sadly end us there. Thank you very much for joining us, and thanks as always to you for watching.
Thank you.